We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and this is a rave, not a Halloween party. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Slasher Month, and this week we are talking the 2003 film Freddy vs. Jason. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my Chicago crossover co-host, Andrew Williams. Are you ready for this one, Andrew?
I am. Movie that was a long time coming, and it's been a while since I've dived back into it, so I'm excited to check this one back out.
So what's your history with this movie? Did you maybe catch this one in theaters, or were you still maybe a little bit young to be in these franchises?
I would have been
how many
16.
times have you seen it?
I would have been 16, so probably not in theaters.
Prime. That's prime age, though.
Well, this was still a decade too late. But they made this movie like 10 years after they should have. But no, like my parents weren't, sending me off to see Freddy versus Jason, and I don't really think this is at the time anything my friends were really chomping at the bit for either. A very odd time, but when you get into all the franchises later, you watch them all, you see what the deal is, and yeah, so I've seen it before, seen it multiple times. I've watched it both idealistically and probably a little bit more pessimistically over the years. But yeah, definitely seen it before. But it's been probably a good at least 5 years since I've watched this one start to finish.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've actually only seen this once before. I watched this whenever I did my Friday the 13th deep dive not too long ago, so I saw it fairly recently. And I gotta say, I'll say this up top here. When I first saw it, the reason I've only seen this one once, but I've seen most other movies in the franchise multiple times, is I didn't really like it. Now I know hashtag positivity podcast. We're here to focus on the positives, but I'm just giving you kind of like a baseline where I started. And so whenever it was time to cover it on the podcast, of course, I watched it again. I watched it with the hashtag PP mindset. And I got to say, I found a lot to like. I enjoyed it a lot more this second time. Maybe I just had different expectations because I had seen it before, and some of the stuff that may bother me the first time I was able to overlook to kind of dig in and see what is working here. I mean, that's the whole premise of our show, to dig through the negative and find what works in every single movie. So I'm excited to talk about it, talk about our favorite scenes. But before we get too far into that, I do want to go back just a little bit. Last week on our show, we covered A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, and we did get a listener to write in about that movie. We didn't read it on that episode, so I want to make sure I cover that here. But Oculus Neko in our Discord had mentioned that this is one of their favorite horror movies whenever we announced that we were covering it. And I told them that I had actually never seen it before, and here was their response. They said, "You're in for a treat." I would say Nightmare on Elm Street movies are my favorite horror movies in general, but the second one is so bad, it's good. It is the epitome of classic 80s horror. The character Jesse has a great crying scene in it, and there's very appropriate crying emojis. I love the over-the-top acting, and there's even romance. I say jokingly. At the end, there is a very touching scene. And then another emoji that implies they are being a little bit sarcastic. So, thanks for writing in about the movie, Oculus Neko. I get the feeling that it's almost and we've talked about this on the show before, like an ironic appreciation, which at the end of the day is just appreciation, right?
Yeah, there's no difference. There's absolutely zero difference between ironically liking something and just liking it.
Yeah, you enjoy it. You enjoy it. I'm glad you enjoyed that one. I'm glad I've finally seen A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, but I still need to finish my marathon. I got to fill in the gap.
Five more to go.
I know. But hey, let's go ahead and jump to the end of that franchise. Talk about Freddy vs. Jason, the movie that was released August 15th of 2003, made on a budget of $30 million. Pretty big budget for a slasher movie. At the box office, it does bring in $116.6 million. I do believe that is the highest box office of either of these franchises. Critically, not super well received. It has just a 42% on Rotten Tomatoes. But again, for a slasher movie, that's not bad. I know the first Nightmare on Elm Street's rated really well, but 42%, this might be the highest rated movie in the Friday the 13th series, which is pretty interesting. And because this movie came out in the early 2000s, it actually has 162 reviews, which is a lot higher than most of the movies in these franchises that came out in the 80s or early 90s, which only get 30 to 50 reviews. So pretty impressive score for a slasher movie, a slasher crossover movie, no less.
Yeah, it's definitely higher than I remembered it being, and it's higher than I expected it. But I just did a quick look, and this is far and away the most expensive Friday the 13th movie. Even Jason X only has a budget of $14 million, and then even the reboot in 2009 only has a budget of $19 million. So this is both the most expensive movie featuring Jason, and it is the highest grossing. It is not, however, the highest grossing Nightmare on Elm Street film. The 2010 reboot actually makes $1 million more dollars at the box office, makes $117.7 million versus the $116.6. And ironically, the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot actually costs more than this as well, coming in at $35 million versus the $30 million for this. So that was the 7 years difference between this and that reboot. Apparently costs got... It makes a little bit of sense. Freddy's always been a little bit more special effects intensive, so I'm not totally shocked, but even still, to this point, the most expensive movie in either franchise, and of the original movies featuring these characters before the reboots, the highest grossing as well. Which, you'd hope for that. You'd hope that these two, that putting them together would net you some financial success. But yeah, it is definitely a movie that was a long time coming, though.
Let's take a look at this creative team. The movie is written by the writing duo of Mark Swift and Damian Shannon. Now, together, they wrote this movie, kind of breaking into Hollywood. And since then, they also wrote the Friday the 13th reboot in 2009 and Baywatch in 2017, starring The Rock and Zac Efron. Remember that Baywatch reboot, Andrew?
I do.
Here's a movie we probably could have covered last month, huh?
Yeah. I mean, hey, hope springs eternal. There's always going to be time to come back. Their filmography on Wikipedia is not a deep filmography. They're one of those groups that's been attached to a lot of things, and just a lot of it has not either their version of things has not been seen through to completion, or it's just sat in developmental purgatory for a long time. But your first credited writing gig is Freddy vs. Jason. That's a pretty big way to start.
The movie's directed by Ronnie Yu. Now, neither of these franchises really have, considering how many movies are each one, really have defining directors. Most directors aren't coming back over and over again. It's kind of like a revolving door. Now, A Nightmare on Elm Street starts with Wes Craven, and he has some involvement in some of the movies, and he comes back to direct one more. But ultimately, when you look at how many movies in the franchise, they're kind of just hot-shotting directors all over. So, no different for this crossover. They bring in Ronnie Yu, who primarily is a Hong Kong cinema director, which is, I'm trying to kind of work it out in my mind, how you go from that type of cinema to horror. However, in his limited American Hollywood filmography, also directed Bride of Chucky. So there is a through line there. Andrew, when you bring in Ronnie Yu, you bring him into your horror franchise for the entry that no longer uses the traditional naming convention and instead is named after the lead character of that horror franchise. When it switches from Child's Play to Chucky, it's Ronnie Yu. When it switches from A Nightmare on Elm Street to Freddy.
Yeah, that's not true for
Ronnie
Nightmare on
Yu.
Elm Street or Jason. Both of those had installments named after the characters before that. Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare is number 6.
It doesn't
And
have
then
a
Jason
Nightmare on Elm
Goes
Street?
to Hell. Jason Goes to Hell is the other.
Well, I know it's not true for Jason. I was really banking on A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's the first one that is
chose
Freddy.
poorly. Hold on. Let's check the tape. No.
I
Nightmare
really
on Elm
want this
Street-
joke to
Nightmare on Elm
work,
Street
Andrew.
Part 6. Nightmare on Elm Street Part 6 is called Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare.
It's not called A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 6?
No. Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare.
God, just
I'm
throw the
sorry.
whole episode out. Why are we even
Just
recording
folks, what are
anymore?
we even doing here?
I was
We
so
failed.
proud of that joke.
You it was a very deep setup. I was like, where are you going with this, Chris?
Well, then I don't know why they brought Ronnie Yu in, Andrew. I've got no reasoning now.
I assume. Well, yeah, I can only assume Bride of Chucky had to be honestly
Sure.
the biggest motivating factor. He also does the Jet Li martial arts film Fearless for any fans of that. But yeah, Wes Craven is really kind of the go-to. Like Nightmare on Elm Street is his thing. Like he writes and directs that first one. So like he kind of gets a lot of credit for kind of that franchise's existence. So if there's anybody that's like attributed to any of these franchises, it's definitely him. And he was offered this. That was actually interesting to look back at all the directors that were offered this, and he was one of them. And he talked about it before. Like people asked him about it, like in the '90s and stuff when like New Nightmare was coming out, and he'd always kind of talks about it like The Undertaker talks about facing Sting, like where he's like, yeah, I get it, but I just really don't care. Like he just doesn't. It just doesn't appeal to him. Like he's like, why would I really want that? Guillermo del Toro and Peter Jackson were both offered it, like, you know, right way before, like both when they were still kind of cutting their teeth on horror films. You know, this is way before stuff like Hellboy and Lord of the Rings was coming. I guess Lord of the Rings was like percolating at the time, or was starting to come out. But yeah, it's a revolving door of like, you know, everybody was like offered this movie in a way, and eventually they land on Ronnie Yu, which again seems like a strange. And even Ronnie Yu himself turned it down once. Like he didn't say yes immediately, and then eventually came back around. Rob Zombie turned it down. It's actually very kind of. It's one of those movies. It's kind of like Man of Steel. The list of people who didn't say yes is a fairly impressive who's who, really, of directors, and this is no exception, especially when it comes to horror films. And yeah, we end up with Ronnie Yu, who, again, I assume he impressed some people. Bride of Chucky, I think, was definitely a big thing at the time. I remember Bride of Chucky coming out. Oddly,
Yeah,
I
that's a big
remember
deal.
like the trailers. But and then that one's still going. Like that's actually really impressive. He's got the television show, and people tell me it's pretty good. Not that might be the franchise that I need to do the deep dive on next is Child's Play, because I don't think I've ever done that. So we'll see. But apparently Ronnie Yu was given a tremendous amount of creative freedom, and that was ultimately why he ended up signing on to the film. But yeah, not an easy search for the studios there.
No, this movie was in development hell for a very long time. As you said, they set it up way back on Friday the 13th, Part 9, Final Friday, Jason Goes to Hell. The end of that movie is a teaser for these two characters facing off as Freddy Krueger's gloved hand pulls Jason's mask underground, dragging him to hell. And that's basically where this movie starts off, but it's, like you said, made 10 years later. So, yeah, revolving door of creative teams trying to get this off the ground. They finally do it. And let's talk about that movie that finally comes out, Freddy versus Jason. Freddy Krueger is no longer able to invade the dreams of teenagers on Elm Street because no one knows he exists anymore. To strike fear into the people of the town, he unleashes Jason Voorhees, who quickly begins doing what he does best, slaughtering teenagers. When the town assumes Freddy is behind the murders, he is once again able to cross over into our world. Once on the hunt, however, he realizes that he has no control over Jason, who is quickly striking down the kids that Freddy wants for himself. The two begin fighting each other with a group of young survivors caught up in the crossfire. Simple enough, right? I mean, that's what the title, Freddy versus Jason. You want to see these two go at it. They're fighting because they both want to kill the same kids. It's a logical way to take it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's as good as justification as any. That's basically the crux of this movie is that Freddy uses Jason to bring himself back to relevance, and then gets mad Jason won't stop killing people.
Yeah, I mean, these are two franchises built on.
I mean, if you
sound
look
logic,
back in
so.
history at, like, say, the Rockefeller versus Carnegie feuds, this is the same story, basically. We're looking back at historical trends with monopolistic business strategies. All are basically this same plot. So you're really just, this is a tale as old as time, is what I'm getting at.
I'm sure that's what our writers were studying whenever they were crafting this
I want to
tale,
kill
but
these kids, not you. It's a tale as old as time.
we're going to jump into all the best scenes of this movie, but first thing we're going to do is talk about the cast of the film, starting with the high point with the best casting and best performance of the movie. Every episode will recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, kick us off here. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Freddy versus Jason?
I'm going straight to the title, and I am giving my Mark Strong to Robert Englund in what is to date his last on-screen theatrical performance as Freddy Krueger. It's obviously he's obviously one of the few people out there that is kind of synonymous with his character. Horror icons tend to have a tendency to be faceless, so like somebody like Jason or Michael Myers are played by tons of different people over time. We'll talk a little bit more about Kane Hodder later. He's kind of one of the exceptions there, but obviously he was the first, I think, person officially signed on to the film in 1999 when this was being kind of officially put into production. And you can definitely tell that he's not taking this lightly. You can tell that he wants to make this as good as he can for the fans. He wants to be as classic Freddy as he can be, despite other versions of the character in the intermittent times there. But I think he's great here. He's appropriately menacing. He's still got the goofiness that's just enough to kind of take the edge off a little bit and kind of stop it from just being terrifying. But like, that's kind of like with New Nightmare. I watched that movie and I'm just like, oh God, Freddy can be absolutely horrifying if you
Yes.
really take away all the humor. Which is kind of how he is in the first one too. It's just a very deep, dark character, but I think he finds a good balance here. I think the makeup looks pretty gnarly here. It's pretty much classic Freddy. That's what they're going for. And obviously that's kind of, again, that's what we're here for. We don't need a massive update to the character. We want classic Freddy, and Robert Englund delivers that in spades. Like I said, he's kind of one of the few guys that's kind of synonymous with his character, to the point that even now, the idea of somebody else being Freddy Krueger is tough to envision. I'd not no disrespect to Jackie Earle Haley. I think he was the best part of the film that he was in, and if there's a weakness in that film, it's not utilizing more of him. But obviously he has to be here, and I'm glad they used him. I'm trying to think of other instances where you've got like a horror icon that's kind of known specifically with a person, and I mean, like, Doug Bradley as Pinhead is probably up there. He played Pinhead 9-10 times. But a lot of these guys kind of fall behind masks, and so there's very rarely a consistent portrayal. But Robert Englund is the exception. And as we've established in the last episode, I think that portrayal is part of why the character becomes so iconic, is because it is tied to a single person. So he takes this seriously. I mean, in the sense that, he's not like phoning this in or anything. But I think he's having a good time doing it. You can tell that he wanted to give the fans this, and I think like I said, he showed up ready to go.
I agree 100% with what you're saying. Robert Englund also getting my Mark Strong Award for Freddy vs. Jason. Now, we talked about him in this performance on our last episode for A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. Neither of us gave him the Mark Strong Award for that movie. Mostly, as we said on that episode, because he's hardly utilized. There's not a lot of screen time for him, and not a lot of chances for his personality to show through in that movie. But here, Freddy vs. Jason, he is the star of the show. I mean, him and Jason Voorhees, but just by the nature of his character actually talking and actually having a personality,
Yeah.
really get the chance to shine. gets to use his classic lines, gets to say the word bitch over and over again, which for some reason is like his thing. But yeah, just that sick sense of humor. And there's moments where it's dark, especially like the beginning of this movie. They're trying to like catch you up to speed in case you aren't familiar with these characters, and they explain his backstory and when he was alive that he killed kids, and like it doesn't show him killing a kid, but it implies enough to make you feel uncomfortable there in the very beginning. And you get to see Robert Englund without all the makeup on, dragging on that cigarette, and yeah, it's a dark portrayal at times.
Just being
as well,
a super creep. Just my
Super
God, like licking the picture and putting it in the book. I was like, oh, like man,
Yeah.
he is living for that. But yeah, and I'd actually forgotten about that intro where you see him like untransformed. And I was just like, man, what a giant creep.
You did mention that this is his last theatrical performance of Freddy Krueger, and Andrew, that is correct. But it is not the last time that he has portrayed the character. Andrew, he's done it once more since this movie. Do you know where?
I feel like I should. And I'm probably going to be really annoyed when I find out what it is.
I'll go ahead and tell you. I have it in my notes here. In 2018, he appeared on the television show The Goldbergs, which takes place in the 80s, as Freddy Krueger.
Like in costume?
Yeah, all the makeup and prosthetics and everything. I haven't seen the episode myself. I saw pictures of it. So I assume
is,
a character is dreaming and they are having a nightmare.
That is a
about
heck
Freddy
of a
Krueger,
show,
but
because I know Rick Moranis came back as Dark Helmet, or like did the Dark Helmet voice for an
Wow.
episode 2, and it's just
Bringing
like,
everybody
what
out
is
of
it
retirement.
about? What is it about that show that just like got all these 80s icons to just be like, sure, one more time, who gives? Why not? But yeah,
I've heard good things about it. I've never seen it, but an interesting legacy for the character
Yeah,
for Robert Englund as Freddy
I
Krueger.
I actually
last
probably
there.
did know about that. Now that I think about it, I'm sure I read that somewhere. Just that was going to happen, and then I probably just left my brain because God knows there's too much information that doesn't matter in there already. But yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. It's like Shawn Michaels coming back to wrestle in Saudi Arabia. It's like no, he had
it's
the
like-
perfect send off. What are you
It's
doing?
like, and not just are you coming back to wrestle somebody. Sorry, folks. This still chafes me. But not just is Shawn Michaels coming out of retirement to face somebody. He's coming out of retirement to face Kane and The Undertaker by teaming with Triple H. Like, if you're going to bring him back for Saudi money, like, give him a big match with somebody that's at least, like, different. Like, don't put him against two guys that's combined age is 100. Like, for the love of God, AJ Styles was right there the whole time.
let's get back to the movie in this cast here. But yeah, Robert Englund getting the Mark Strong Award. But also Jason Voorhees is here. This go round portrayed by Ken Kersinger, which is his first and only time portraying Jason Voorhees. We talked about it earlier this month on our Jason Next episode that Kane Hodder is undoubtedly the most synonymous with Jason Voorhees. He played the character 4 times. 7, 8, 9, and 10. And now the 11th entry in the franchise, you get someone else. It's a bit controversial. There's been a lot of criticisms of this. I mentioned watching that big old documentary about this franchise, and some people blamed Ronnie Yu for the change, but Ronnie said it was actually out of his hands. Someone else made the decision, and I don't know. I don't know why Kane Hodder's not in here, other than they seem to envision a different physical presence for Jason this go around, and they wanted someone larger, and they landed on Ken. I personally would have liked to have seen Kane Hodder come back just because of what the character means to him, and seeing him face off with Robert Englund would be great. But putting all that aside and just trying to judge Ken solely based on his performance in this movie, ultimately I like it. I like how large and menacing Jason is. I think it's physically probably the biggest he's been since like part 3. I think they had a really big dude in some of those early movies, and so it's very different because Freddy is obviously not a very large person and he's not physically imposing. So to pair him up with someone that is physically large, I think is a good sort of a visual juxtaposition on screen. So I've got no complaints about what he's doing, but I would have liked to have seen Kane, but it's a little unfair to count that against
It's not Dave's
Ken.
fault.
It's not his
or
fault.
Ken, rather, yeah. Dave. He has a brother
It's
named
not
Dave.
Dave's fault, though, to be
Dave.
fair. It's also not Dave's fault.
Not Dave's
Whoever
fault
Dave is.
Yes, Dave Kersinger, who is his brother and played for the Calgary Stampeders of the Canadian Football League from 1978 to 1986.
Oh, that's
which
who
I
you
did
were
not
thinking
know.
of. Okay.
I just read it off Wikipedia right now. I'm not that deep in the woods, folks. Yeah, he actually has a brief relationship with Jason already. He has a bit part in Jason Takes Manhattan, where he plays a cook that gets beat up by Jason. And he apparently does do some stunt doubling in a few short scenes for Jason in that movie. So he actually has technically played Jason before. And that might have been the connection through here where they were like, we want somebody a little bit bigger. And Kane Hodder's 6'3", Ken's 6'5". So like it's 2 inches. Doesn't seem like that much. Robert Englund's 5'9". Like either one of those guys is going to look massive next to Robert Englund. It really like it's one of those things where it's like when it feels like, I don't know what ultimately it was, but it feels like a lot. It's definitely a situation where you hear all the reasons why and you don't really believe any of them. You're just kind of like, you just went in a different direction. Like that's it. Like that's all there is to it. You wanted something else and you didn't want Kane Hodder for that. Again, it would have been cool. Like Kane Hodder he's the closest you get to somebody being synonymous with the Jason performance. He's played Jason the most times out of anyone. And yeah, it would have been nice to see him get that rub, as it were, in wrestling terms. But you know, everybody involved kind of like you can tell it bothers him, but you know he doesn't hold it against Ken or Robert or any of those people. You know, this is something that, you know, they're going to do what they're going to do. But to that regard, I think Ken is doing a good job here. He apparently didn't do a lot of the stunts. Apparently, Ronnie, you didn't really want him doing a lot of the Jason stunts. So some of the more intricate ones, like where he's walking through the field on fire and killing kids, that's a stunt man. That's not him. But that is something that Ken would have definitely done on like other movies. So it's kind of strange that he doesn't do it here. But it's so he does get some cool stuff. But he, like you said, he looks like, I don't want you to have to censor it, so I won't say what you think. I won't say what you know Andrew, I want to say.
Andrew, the people want to hear it.
He's a brick house. He is just a massive dude. And when he is mowing down the kids and fighting Robert Englund, like, there is no doubt in your mind that this dude is just a friggin' monster. He is absolutely tearing it apart. He's definitely somebody that physically, as Jason, is... You can't go wrong. He is ready to go, and he is just mauling people. I would be terrified if I ran into this man. So, yeah.
Let's talk about some of the normal people in this cast, like Monica Keena, who plays Lori Campbell, arguably the lead of the film, at least after our two slashers. And before we jump into the performance, Andrew, I gotta ask, you're writing a horror film, a slasher film, and you name a character Lori Campbell. Do you think these names are inspired by previous characters and actresses in horror films, or is it a coincidence?
I would not suggest it's a coincidence.
So I'm thinking Laurie Strode, right? Halloween. Yep. And I'm thinking Neve Campbell of Scream fame. Again, one of those could be an inspiration, one of them could be a coincidence, but I would, I think they knew what they were doing. Yeah, that's a little much, but that's cool. These movies are all about homages, and that's probably what's going on there. As far as the character, her job is to be distraught almost the entire movie, but as a final girl, she gets her nice badass scenes there at the end when it comes time to handle business and take out these slashers. A bit of a dramatic backstory with her mom getting killed by her dad, but then she finds out it was actually Freddy possessing her father. So, twists and turns abound in this movie. But most of these performances, especially the teenagers, the finger quotes teenagers, because they are definitely in their 20s, they're good. They're solid. They're exactly what you expect from a movie like this.
Exactly. It's interesting to think about because this movie is like, it's almost a sequel to an Elm Street movie that doesn't exist.
Yes, yes.
Like,
The first time I saw this, because again, I hadn't seen all the Elm Street movies. I'm like, oh man, I guess I should have watched the previous entries of this franchise because there's clearly like this guy's brother has dealt with Freddy before. There's characters I should know, but no, that movie doesn't exist, right? Yeah,
that movie's not there, and so it's so interesting that when you finally get around to making this movie, you make it in such a way that all of these characters have like this deep backstory that like didn't happen in another film. It gives them all a relationship to Freddy and that sort of thing. But I just thought that was a really interesting choice because like her boyfriend being in the psychiatric hospital and his friend and like you said his brother that dealt with Freddy before and all of this is like the content of another Freddy movie that just never existed. And I thought that was a very interesting choice, but it's designed to give the characters more than just a tangential relationship to Freddy. And I mean, Jason in this whole movie is definitely the outlier. Freddy just uses him for his own purposes. But yeah, that was still just watching it. I was like, there's a whole Freddy movie that exists in the backstory of these characters that just never was made. And her character gets kind of the most direct relationship there with obviously her mother getting killed by her father being possessed by Freddy, and then her boyfriend going to the psychiatric hospital and all of that, and just the whole idea that this town is covered up Freddy Krueger, which is, that's part of the plot. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But yeah, there's this whole deep backstory that I'm not suggesting they don't explore it well enough, but it's literally all of it amounts to the content of a whole nother film, and that's just an interesting. Just thought that was an interesting way to go about it. But she's doing exactly what needs to be done here. She's essentially our final girl and essentially our lead of the non serial killer characters, and she does a good job.
Now, the casting that I remember the most from this movie's announcement is Kelly Rowland as Kia Watterson. I remember seeing all of the trailers and being like, hey, that's Kelly Rowland of Destiny's Child, who I'm reading broke up amicably shortly before the release of this movie, because they all were doing their own thing. And another girl in that group apparently has had a very successful career since then. But Kelly Rowland, yeah, I just knew her as a singer of Destiny's Child, and then I saw that she was going to be in a horror movie, and I just thought that was interesting. Andrew, you ever see that Kelly Rowland music video, or at least the clip from it, where she is texting her boyfriend on her flip phone, and you see like a close-up of her text, but actually she is typing in an Excel spreadsheet?
No, I have not, Chris.
It is very funny. I'll post it in our Discord. That is,
cool.
In my mind, that's Kelly Rowland's legacy. She's in Freddy vs. Jason. She was in Destiny's Child, and she texted someone in an Excel spreadsheet.
And those are an increasing level of performance, right? From lowest to highest.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, she plays I guess Laurie's best friend in a way. Like they've got some history here. They're they go way back. That's the deep backstory that's implied here. Definitely, gives these characters more weight to their friendships. And in that regard, narratively, I understand why you do something like that, because it gives the characters this backstory without having to kind of just endlessly do exposition about it. But yeah, she's doing a good job here. She gets pretty deep into the film, gets some good quips, gets a chance to stand up against both of our guys, fights both of them. Sort of, if you want to call it that.
Don't put up much of a fight against Jason, but
yeah, Jason. A lot of people attempt to fight Jason, but yeah, it was definitely a surprise seeing her here. Definitely, I guess one of the early instances of those of that early 2000s music stars trying to branch out into films, and yeah, it's fun.
Jason Ritter plays Will Rollins. Another lead of the movie, one of the main characters of the teenage cast. This is, like you mentioned, he's in a psychiatric ward when the movie begins. because of the events of a movie that we never saw, basically. But he was a one-time boyfriend of Laurie Campbell, and she thought he moved away, but he was actually placed in a psychiatric ward. We find out later it's because he saw Laurie's dad kill her mom, and then he lied to Laurie, said she died in a car accident, and he reveals that to her, but it turns out, again, Freddy was responsible for the whole thing. So a lot of twists and turns, a lot of backstory, pretty interesting stuff, honestly. Stuff that they didn't have to do. In a movie called Freddy vs. Jason, we just want to see these two characters fight. But they give these backstories to these characters and enough twists and turns of the plot to keep it interesting whenever you don't have the two titular characters on screen, which I do appreciate. As far as their performance, I mean, he's a young kid in a slasher movie, right? And he gets to survive till the end. I noticed that name, Jason Ritter, reminds me, of course, of John Ritter, and looked it up, and lo and behold, this is John Ritter's son. I had no idea that his son was in the biz, but here he is in Freddy vs. Jason.
He is indeed. Jason Ritter, also an alum of the film that I saw everywhere when I was in high school, Swim Fan. That psychological thriller film that I just remember seeing ads for everywhere. But and then Jason Ritter himself was apparently a very late stage replacement for Brad Renfro. Rest in peace, Brad Renfro. He died in 2008. A child actor who had a series of personal complications in his life and issues that he ultimately was unable to overcome. But
we should throw an RIP out to Jason Ritter as well, or John Ritter as well.
Yes. Also gone too soon. But Brad Renfro would have been a little bit. Would have been 20 when the movie came out, so he would have been right at the actual age these characters probably should have been more closely. But not sure why the change was made. But Jason Ritter jumps in, like you said, this. A deep backstory for some of these characters. And like I said, he's one that's basically been in the psychiatric institute where they are suppressing their dreams so that Freddy can't come to them. They're taking I think the drug is called Hypnosil. And it's basically suppressing all the dreams of everybody in there that ever basically came into contact with Freddy. Or potentially knew that there was something about Freddy or would go looking for something. And it's deep cover up. It's one of those things where like you really think about all the people that have to be in on it, and you're just like, man, I'm simultaneously impressed that you guys were all able to stick the landing on this, but also kind of horrified.
It's like the village levels of a community coming together.
Like you all came together to make sure that Freddy never bothered everyone by imprisoning children in a psychiatric hospital. Fantastic. But yeah, he plays kind of he's like I said, he's Laurie's kind of former boyfriend, still current. And he also finds out that the letters he sends don't get out because they don't want them to communicate at all. So it's a deep thing, but he also gets to jump right into the thick of this here and gets to go up with both of our characters, and it's pretty cool stuff.
Chris Marquette plays Charlie Linderman. Now, here's the thing about Charlie. He is really into Laurie, but Charlie, he's a bit of a nerd, Andrew, and he gets picked on by Kia, and then he finally stands up to Kia by telling her off and says it's actually her own insecurities is the reason he attacks him. And Kia, she respects that he stood up to her, and they sort of get a little romance going before they both die. But that is the story arc of Chris Marquette's character, the classic nerd trope, but he gets to get the girl, he gets to play an important part in the climax of the movie and keeping Jason subdued, and overall fun character that I enjoyed.
Yeah, he's a fun character. He kind of ends up, our group kind of forms very, very strangely, like the core group that kind of ends up being the kind of main group that is kind of barreling towards the conclusion here. But he kind of, like I said, he's way into Laurie. He keeps, he tries to take a shot, but, never seriously takes it. And then eventually, like I said, kind of strikes up a thing with Kia. And kind of gets a little bit of a sacrificial moment at the end where he kind of ends up taking some mortal wounds, trying to give everybody else some more time to kind of enact their plan. And then ultimately succumbs to those injuries. And it's, a little bit of a heartfelt moment. But yeah, I like what he's doing here.
Lachlan Monroe plays Deputy Scott Stubbs. Now, the police department of this town are working together to keep Freddy Krueger under wraps, but he actually breaks from those ranks to help out our teenagers who are in trouble. But here's the thing about our actor here, Lachlan Monroe Andrew. You know, the thing is, he is not Jake Busey. Isn't that interesting? This guy is not.
No, because I never thought he was Jake Busey.
This guy is not Gary Busey's son, even though he looks just like him. Come on, Andrew. He maybe doesn't look exactly like Jake Busey, but does he not look like a Busey? He could easily be Jake Busey's stepbrother. He looks enough like him that he could be a stepbrother. You got to give me that.
He doesn't have to look anything like him if he's his stepbrother. I could look like Jake Busey's stepbrother.
That's my.
All right,
my
I'm willing to relent that if I take off my glasses and squint my eyes, I may see a relation.
It's those teeth. He's got the Busey teeth.
He's got the Busey teeth. All right.
It's funny because he's popped up in a lot of movies. I've seen him in various things. I probably mostly associate him with Scary Movie. And by extension, I Know What You Did Last Summer, because he's in like the I Know What You Did Last Summer parody scenes of that movie. And then here he is in like a legitimate slasher that's not a parody, but I've got, these memories of him in Scary Movie, so it's interesting. He was also in The Predator, so an alum of the show. And you know who's also in The Predator? Friggin' Jake Busey. They're in the same movie together, but just to make things even more complicated. But I like him. I like his character here. I like him being the honest cop, the cop that's willing to actually do the right thing and help our kids. Very noble of him.
Yeah, he also was recently an alum of Peacemaker. If anybody saw the John Cena,
right.
HBO Max, he plays one of the cops there, Larry Fitzgibbon. But he's the new recruit basically that kind of doesn't quite understand what's going on, and he's the one that actually kind of uncovers the Jason Voorhees connection, because basically the first kill is a kid that gets squashed, impaled horribly, and then gets crushed by like a folding bed. And they all immediately assume Freddy, because that's Freddy's MO. He kills kids in their beds. He did it in the first movie. He's doing it here. Obviously, it's what he does. But he's the one that kind of thinks that it's a Jason Voorhees copycat. We don't exactly know why he thinks that, but he's the one that kind of puts that together and kind of takes it to the police chief. And the police chief is like, "We know who did this. Stop! Like, let it go." He's the one that's like, "Don't look into it. Don't think about it. Like, forget you ever saw anything about this." And so he ends up going to help the kids and ends up having his own standoff with Jason that doesn't really go in his favor. But yeah, he gets that role of like the cop who's like, there's more going on here than we realize, and tries to help them. And like I said, doesn't quite go in his favor, but solid performance nonetheless. I have to rewatch Scary Movie, man. I haven't rewatched those in a long time.
It holds up. 1, holds up. 2, gets a little rough. 3, best in the series, if you ask me.
And how many of those are there now?
They made 5 of them. I haven't seen 4 and 5. I hear 4 is still pretty good, and 5 is rough. But I haven't seen them, so I don't know. But...
Well, I'll see if those are on sale, given we are in the spooky season right now.
The people listening cannot see the dance you did when you said spooky season, but I did, Andrew, and I appreciate it.
I always think, for some reason, and you can cut this if you want, but I think of that like skeleton puppet gif where he's like dancing.
Yeah, from like the CW or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. No. I'll send you the.
Oh,
gif.
the puppet. Yeah, where he drops his butt.
Like,
left. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's
puppet.
like.
Yeah.
So I always think of that. So I always do this weird like shoulder shake anytime I hear spooky season, because I just think of that dumb gif.
Now I am too. Thank you.
And so I was telling that to Liz, and I was like, "Do you even know?" It's like, "Do you know what I'm talking about?" She was like, "No." So I had to like show her the gift so that when she saw me doing the dumb thing,
I know exactly.
She
what
understood
about,
what I was doing.
Kyle Labine plays a character named Bill Freeberg. Now, here's the thing about this character, Andrew. He's got this like long, light brown hair. He wears a hoodie. He smokes a lot of pot. He's Jay from Jay and Silent Bob. It seems pretty clear to me that it is shamelessly modeled off of that character. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I think that's a safe assumption. I think that you can Like, because I didn't even like remember when he like came into the fold. I just kind of looked up and there he was, and I was like, yeah, that's Jay from
Yeah.
Jay and Silent Bob. That's just if Jason Mewes was unavailable, apparently.
He even says, he has a line at one point during like a very intense part of the movie. Let's take a little Jay break, huh?
Yeah, like
Come on.
What are you doing? What are you doing here, man?
But yeah, good performance. It's fun, and he gets to be possessed by Freddy at one point. Have some pretty killer moments, no pun intended. But solid performance there from Kyle.
Yeah, I think so. He gets to make a couple of jokes. Ends up getting to play kind of a relatively important role when Freddy is trying to get the upper hand on Jason. Jason or Freddy kind of possesses him, and he kind of injects Jason with a bunch. Because it's an interesting little ripple, because you think Freddy is getting the tranquilizers to put everybody else to sleep, but he actually gets them to put Jason to sleep, which I was like, didn't see that coming. But yeah, fun stuff.
As with all slasher movies, this is a pretty deep cast. There's a lot of kids that get killed and parents and other characters we could talk about. But I've got just one more on my list that I really want to cover their performance, and that is Brendan Fletcher, who plays Mark Davis. This character is in the psychiatric ward with Will and helps him escape. And I like this performance a lot in this character. This is the one where he knows a lot about Freddy Krueger because his brother was killed by Freddy Krueger and talked to him about the nightmares he was having up until his death. And then he gets sent to the psychiatric ward because he knows who Freddy is. And he's very intense. I mean, every line that he delivers, he looks like he's always on the edge of the nervous breakdown. Very cool performance, and tragically he dies fairly early in the movie, somewhere around the midpoint, and it's got a pretty gnarly death. It's pretty effective, but I like this performance. I like the character's story. Again, these backstories that feel like they're coming from an unproduced Nightmare on Elm Street movie. That was a pretty clever way to go, and he probably gets the meatiest role in that regards.
I agree. He's got like his deep kind of background there that they definitely play on. They use his brother's death to kind of have Freddy kind of taunt him. And it's definitely probably the most classic Nightmare on Elm Street kind of sequence where Freddy's in somebody's dream, like really messing with them. Like Freddy, this is definitely a sequence that's a lot like that. There's a lot of weird, like body horror stuff. There's some really unsettling kind of imagery. And that's kind of the classic Freddy stuff there. So this kill is definitely the kind of, that's definitely the sequence where they're like, let's have Freddy do some Freddy stuff, and that's where it happens. So yeah, I agree. It's a very good performance, and again, it's just pulling on that backstory there that they've kind of sprinkled throughout this movie. I do want to give a shout out to Paula Shaw as Pamela Voorhees, who gets a couple of spots here. But what I think is interesting about this, and it's a little bit unfortunate that this didn't happen, is that Betsy Palmer, who plays Pamela Voorhees in the first Friday the 13th and appears briefly in the sequel, was asked to return for this, which I thought would have been fantastic. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of different stories as to why she wasn't included. The most consistent of which seems to be that they offered her a stunningly low salary for which she didn't see it as being worth it. And others said that it was, scheduling issues of her name. But I wouldn't be shocked at all for something that was basically a cameo if they were kind of lowball that a little bit. And that is unfortunate. But I think Paula Shaw gets to, like I said, it's just a couple of scenes, but she gets to really jump into that role and kind of, because basically the gist is that Freddy is pretending to be Pamela Voorhees to get Jason to do his bidding. But yeah, it's unfortunate Betsy Palmer they weren't able to come to terms on that. I think it would have been a really cool kind of legacy tie-in to that whole series, because that is the other thing that, the movie, it's our two icons, but by and large, outside that, everybody else is new. Which is, like I said, it's why it kind of feels like I feel like there's a whole movie's worth of material with the backstory, because they're giving us these characters' backstories versus, trying to bring back like a Tommy Jarvis or somebody like that for this movie, which could have been interesting. And if they'd continued going down this path, who knows, they may have come back to something like that. But it would have been an interesting legacy tie-in. But Paula Shaw is no slouch, and she came knowing what the role needed, and she gave it.
Yeah, I agree. You can tell that she's Pamela Voorhees because she is wearing the iconic sweater, the ransom sweater from Knives Out, basically. And something about like an older, like a grandma-looking woman who we assume they don't watch horror movies. That's not what grandmas do. To see them in one and like screaming these lines about they'll remember me and like being really into it, it's cool. I always get a kick out of that. And it's why it's such a cool twist in that original Friday the 13th movie. Like, the killer is the mom. You know, it's a slightly older woman do these gruesome kills. Like, it's spoilers, sorry, in case you didn't know that. But
if you hadn't seen the 50-year-old movie.
But yeah, it is cool. It would be interesting. I haven't like looked at pictures of Betsy Palmer. She's obviously, I mean, it's just, like I said, it's only like 20 years after the original. So I guess she's not want to be super age, super that much older. It would have been cool to have her come back. It's a shame, but I'm glad they still included the character.
Well, rest in peace, Betsy Palmer. She passed away in 2015, and she was 88. So she would have been. So in 2015, she was 88. She would have been 13 years previously. She would have been 75. So she definitely would have been on the older side, but that means she was in her 50s when she did the first one. So, and she's one of those like legendary like television film actors. She dated James Dean. Like, she's all over the place. Like, there was a period of time where like she kind of thought Friday the 13th was like a dark spot on her career, where she was kind of like, oh God, I can't believe I did that. Like, I did a slasher movie, and like I'm an actress. What am I doing? But she kind of came around and accepted that she, you know, its place. She was like, it's a very important thing, and I'm glad I was a part of it. And she apparently, like I said, she, like, when they were like, hey, would you do this? She said yes, like offhand. She was like, I will come back to be Pamela Voorhees in this movie. And then like when they started doing the brass tacks, that's when it kind of fell apart. And like I said, it's unfortunate. But like I said, Paula Shaw shows up, but it would have been cool to have that little legacy piece of it, kind of tying it all together. The comic sequels, which I'll talk a little bit more, they do that a little bit more, but we'll talk about that a bit later.
For now, I think it's time that we start jumping into the scenes of the movie, specifically the best scenes of the film, starting with our personal favorites. Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene in Freddy versus Jason?
There's some cool moments throughout this whole movie, but I can't deny the kind of iconic image of Freddy and Jason facing off in the shack with it on fire and like burning down around them. And I was just like, that's the money shot. That's what you've been waiting the whole movie for. Like, is they have that kind of fight that's like in the boiler room, and they kind of do that on purpose. They give us the fight in Freddy's domain, and then they give us the fight in Jason's domain. But the fight in Jason's domain, I think, is when I'm having the most fun with the movie. There's definitely some cool stuff. We mentioned it, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. But this is when they finally like go at it in the real world. That's when I really like was like, all right, this is what I came for. And it's by no means like a short fight. They go at it off and on for the rest of the movie at that point, which is a good amount of time. But I'm having a good time with it here, Jason. You know, and I like that there's a contrast in fighting styles. You know, again, to use wrestling terms, this is a bit of a David versus Goliath thing. Jason is just this massive behemoth.
Wait. To use wrestling terms, this is David versus Goliath? Yes. Andrew, I think you're referencing something else.
No, they say it all the time in wrestling, Chris.
That's the origin of the phrase David versus Goliath. Pro wrestling.
Clearly was the wrestler Goliath versus some wrestler named Davey. But so you've got Jason, who's just like a powerhouse. So he's just going straight for the slashes, the throws, the everything, while Freddy is having to be faster and quicker. And they integrate that into the fight. I think it makes it unique. It makes it different, because that's the other thing that's been interesting about Freddy by and large, is that like Jason like physically mauls his victims. Like, he beats them up and destroys them. Freddy has been this more psychological master who does use his claw blades and everything, but like you never see him like really get into physical confrontations with people. Not really. So this is definitely a change up to the character, and it's one of those things that people probably took some issue with because they could see it as being kind of out of character. But when you're in front of the dude and he's attacking you, you got to do something. Otherwise, he's just going to cut right through you. So I like this. It kind of, like I said, this goes off and on through the whole thing, and these dudes beat each other up. They do not hold back. They lose limbs. They lose fingers. They lose body parts. They punch through each other's bodies. I think they both do that at one point. At one point, Jason punches through Freddy's body with Freddy's own arm. Like, it's gnarly stuff. And I'm just like, this is exactly what I came for. This is what I wanted to see. And the movie does, like I said, we get a little bit of a teaser earlier on where we get Jason versus Freddy with kind of Freddy's more goofy side. But this is where it's kind of, nothing else in the way. The kids are still here and they're kind of more distractions at this point, but this is really just them fighting each other. And most of the stuff that the kids do ends up being ineffective anyway. But I'm having a good time during this whole, this is basically the last good bit of the film here. I think that's where I'm having the most fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, they're delivering on the promise made by the title of this film. There's a long, drawn-out fight. Like I said, they fought earlier in the dream world, so, Freddy's domain, and he gets the best of Jason. And now they're fighting at Camp Crystal Lake. They're on Jason's home turf, as they say, to try to kind of even the odds there. And it's a long fight. As far as, like, iconic imagery, yeah, I definitely think of them in the sort of cabin that's on fire. They're facing off. Like, that's cool. That's what I signed up for, is the poster of this freaking movie, face to face. And they have like this like brawl, like a barroom brawl, like Freddy like taking Jason and like slaying him through the window and sliding him across all the glass. I mean, they every type of way they can attack each other, they try to come up with it. It reminds me of like a 90s action flick, because in the 90s, all action movies always end up in a factory because there's all kinds of set pieces you can do without having to explain why that stuff is there. And for whatever reason, at Camp Crystal Lake, there's a mill. There's basically a factory outdoors. I don't know exactly what that stuff is used for, but all this equipment that they use to attack each other, whether it's the big old like metal tanks or swinging a giant bucket into Jason, like every set piece you can think of. They go through it. And then finally fighting on the pier. I really like, you mentioned Jason has Freddy's arm at one point. He has severed his clawed hand and is using that against him. Meanwhile, Freddy has Jason's machete. So they each have like each other's iconic weapon, stabbing each other. It's great. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think this is going to be a lot of people's pick for best scene of the movie or favorite. And I can see why. Like I said, it's delivering on the promise made by that title. You go to a movie called Freddy vs. Jason, these are the type of scenes that you want to see. So, Andrew.
Right.
That's a great pick.
Thank you.
I'm going with a different scene. However, despite all that praise, I do think it's a lot of fun. I am going to go with the scene, and there's a lot of fun scenes here. We won't be able to talk about them, but at the end of the day, I'm going to go with one that is a fun action scene. It's got a lot of horror, but also a lot of story elements built into it, and a lot of plot that, again, this movie didn't have to do, but I appreciate having enough of an interesting plot to keep us interested when the bad guys aren't on screen. So I'm going to go with the scene at the psychiatric ward. This is whenever the kids have figured out what was going on, why they were at the psychiatric ward taking that medication. They weren't having dreams. So they're going to break in there, they're going to steal that medication, make sure none of them are going to dream anymore, and essentially erase Freddy. Seems like a logical end to the movie. It started off with no one knew who Freddy Krueger was, so he didn't exist. They find out who he is, and if they can erase him again, then they will win. What I love about it is they break in, and during the events of the scene, almost immediately, all those drugs get flushed away. So it's like, it presents this like logical ending to the movie, and then nope, that's gone. We're back to being hopeless, and I like that twist. It kind of kicks off with, I'm just going to call him Jay. I already forgot the character's name. I think it's Bill or something very unfitting, but Jay has his Jay break. He starts smoking pot, and he sees this worm bug thing like crawl into the door, and he's like looking at it like, wow, I'm really high, and there's this like fun music playing, and then the bug presents like a bong of its own, and they smoke together. It's just so ridiculous. Of course, it turns out that thing is actually Freddy Krueger, who goes inside of his mouth and possesses him to do his bidding. But we also get some good horror bits, because he walks into the psychiatric ward and there's all these patient beds in the room with kids in it, and all the kids sit up, and all of their eyes are seemingly missing.
Creepy.
All their eyes are bandages, and like in unison they're talking to him and pointing. Just good creepy stuff. This movie is ultimately about the action and having fun and kind of some of the silliness, but it takes its time in certain scenes to be a little dark, be a little creepy, be a little horror-esque, and this is one of them. At the end of the scene, you've got a possessed Jay with all this tranquilizer. He's destroyed the medication that prevents you from sleeping, and he has a face-off with Jason. And Jason, with one slide of the machete, cuts him in half. And a pretty gnarly, and I will say practical, special effect there in the hallway. So, yeah, a lot of good stuff happening here. This is what I'm picking as my favorite, because, again, this is story-wise, I keep going back to this, but like there's more plot than you expect, and I mean that in a good way. It's not so much that it's super convoluted or hard to follow, which is enough to be interesting and hold your interest throughout some of the less action-packed scenes. And I like that there's some pretty good twists. You think the kids have it figured out? Nope, that solution's gone, and they got to think on their feet and try to come up with another way to get out of this. So, yeah, the scene at the psych ward, favorite scene in the movie.
I agree. I think this is a great scene. Like I said, you get a little bit of that goofiness with Freddy here, kind of immediately contrasted with some of the more seriousness of the character as well. You get Jason doing some Jason stuff, and like you said, you get that plot momentum. Like you said, I keep saying it, but like there's a whole movie of backstory here that just doesn't need to be there, but it makes the story that much, as compelling is in a situation like this. Hashtag PP, but it's definitely, this is kind of, we go back here to kind of get the drug that's going to stop us from dreaming, at least, and then Freddy gets rid of it, and then he wants to take out. It's actually interesting because, like you said, it's a flip on the whole thing, because Freddy's goal in this sequence is to get rid of the hypnosil because he doesn't want anybody else suppressing their dreams, but his major point is to put Jason to sleep, so that he can take out Jason in the dream world. It's actually, like I said, they are not the kind of source of Freddy's ire at this point. It's not the kids, it's Jason at this point. And that's actually kind of seeding our main conflict. Bill is just a kind of a cipher at this point. And there's multiple points where it feels like Freddy's issue, like, even when he's got the sequence with what's his name in the bathroom? Mark. He literally tells him, he's like, I need you to send a message for me, which is Freddy basically, I'm not going to kill you. I need you to tell everybody what's going on. And when he refuses, that's when Freddy kills him instead. So it's a very interesting kind of subversion there that's going on, and carries that through the scene where, he's getting rid of the hypnosil because he doesn't want the kids to take it, but he's also trying to knock out Jason so that he can fight Jason in the dream world and hopefully beat him there. That way, then Freddy can get on and, these are my kids to kill, not yours. We get back to our our central age-old premise here. And it's like I said, it's an interesting flip on that. And like I said, it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. When, he's having Bill fill up all those syringes, I was like, he's going to knock out all those kids, and the kids are going to be stuck in the dreams, and Freddy's going to go after him. And it's like, nope. He injects Jason and goes after Jason. And I'm like, can't say I saw that coming, because I didn't see it coming. So, cool stuff here. Great. A fantastic choice, Chris. Not just a good choice. A fantastic choice.
A lot of good stuff in this movie, honestly. Like I said, previously I watched this movie. It wasn't my favorite, and I will say hashtag PP. Just a little light criticism here. I guess this is a little bit, if you'll allow me. This we mentioned back in our Jason X episode that movie, the writers and the director of that movie, like, they knew what we wanted. They wanted silly, it's a killer in space, give us the fun kills, give us the trash. Like, that's what we want. I feel like the script here is doing that, I feel like, I don't know if this falls on our director or where it is exactly, but at times the tone of this movie, it seems a little too self-serious for me. It seems like it's
Right.
really trying to be more serious than I would expect from a crossover movie with slasher franchises. That being said, I think the script of this movie is delivering the right level of fun kills, trashy dialogue, and a great example is the beginning of this movie. They give us the Freddy backstory, and then we very quickly move to a young woman at a lake, going for a swim in the middle of the night. Andrew, let's see, 1, 2, 3, my fifth note as I was watching this movie is one word: boobies.
Yep.
We get boobies. We get a topless woman very early on. It goes for a swim for absolutely no reason. And then we got the Jason music and he appears and she's running through the woods. She's still half naked. And it's exactly what I expect so far, right? I mean, it is trashy, sleazy slasher. And what I think is interesting about the scene is that we find out that essentially we're in hell.
Yeah.
This is just Jason. This is just what Jason does in hell, apparently.
This is what I was going to say. Like, I find it hilarious that this is Jason's idea of hell, is he just kills campers all the time.
Over and over and over. He's just like practicing for one day.
Jason's just like, I thought this place was supposed to be bad. And like, I don't know if this was like Freddy was making him see this. I don't know, but like, just the notion that this is Jason's hell is just having to kill campers all the time. I'm so tired of killing campers.
But we very quickly get to the premise of the movie and get things kickstarted where, like I said, Pamela Voorhees appears and tells him, you need to make people remember me, but it's actually Freddy who is giving Jason life again in his body that's buried back on Earth. The heart starts pumping and he emerges, and then we get like our opening credits and we get very loud early 2000s new metal music. Man, we've said it so many times on this show that the 2000 to 2005, that specific period, you could really date it with the music. I pulled up the soundtrack to this movie. I'll just read you a few bands from the soundtrack. Let's all go back. We got Hatebreed, Seven Dust, Stone Sour, Lamb of God, Seether, Power Man 5000, Slipknot, Mushroom Head, Killswitch Engage. Baby, it's the early 2000s.
It definitely is. I was listening to the end credits and I was just like, how many new metal songs can we put in a row? The answer is 3. Yeah, I definitely leaning into the time period there. We weren't messing around.
Jason's first kills on Elm Street, or first kill, he just kills one kid, but
That
we
is
got all these
gnarly.
teenagers in this house. It's so good. So we've got the teenagers. They're doing the things that teenagers do. They're drinking, they're smoking, they're fornicating in their parents' bed. And then whenever the woman in said act goes to take a shower, I do have a note that says more boobies. Jason appears and he kills the young man laying in bed by stabbing him in the back. The machete goes through his body and through the bed, which I do believe would be an homage to a previous kill in the series. But it goes one step farther by collapsing the bed in half. And the man's body gets bent the wrong direction, so his heels are touching the back of his head. It's goofy, it's silly, it's funny, it's bloody and gory. It's everything, again, that I want from these types of movies. So they set the bar pretty high with that first kill. I really liked it.
Yeah, that was gnarly. I'd forgotten some of the details of this movie, and that one is just, it's, if you're gonna start big, and they start big. And like I said, it's done a little bit on purpose that way, obviously, because we're trying to create that notion that these are Freddy Krueger-esque kills, and this lives up to that. You know, like I said, Freddy kills kids in their beds. It's what he does. From Johnny Depp to this kid, it's what he does. You start off high here. Like I said, it's kids having a party that they shouldn't be having, and if it's one thing we know Jason hates, it's kids having parties when they shouldn't, and kids having sex. Like, if
Premarital sex.
I'm sure there's another world where Jason Voorhees is a fantastic missionary for some group, but I'm just advocating, folks, don't drink alcohol and don't have sex. Just doing it in a healthy way that's not killing anybody. But yeah, he lives up to that promise multiple times here, interrupting multiple parties, and interrupting multiple attempts at fornication.
Camp Crystal Lake was actually a Christian camp. It's actually a Bible camp. He took those lessons to heart.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you? Jason does get some really cool sequences here. Like the sequence here, like I'm not going to ask the question of like, how did Jason sneak into this house? And like, he's a giant lumbering man who just appears in this bedroom. I'm not going to ask that because honestly, I don't care. I'm not thinking about that. But the rave scene is probably another favorite of my Jason scenes, which the
cornfield rager.
Cornfield rager. And this gives us Jason kind of just mowing down people for a while, but we get a very iconic stunt sequence that is just a fully on fire Jason Voorhees walking through these cornfields, killing kids. And I was just watching. I was like, man, that looks cool as hell. There's no denying it. That is just awesome looking. Like I said, Ken Kinzinger was not Jason for this sequence. Actual stunt people took over for that. I think it got nominated for some kind of stunt award, but it was just cool because like what happens is he kills a couple of people. This is actually interesting because he kills somebody that Freddy is trying to kill in their dream, and they disappear from the dream because they're dead now. And that's kind of what seeds the real kind of issue, is because Freddy's trying to kill these kids and really reestablish his legend, but Jason kills them first. And so, so that's kind of what happens here is Jason kills these kids. One woman who was in a compromising position. So Jason killed the girl, but he also killed somebody doing something bad. But
he killed a would-be rapist. Like
he did.
There are Jason is a bit sympathetic in this movie, or empathetic, or if there is a good guy, it's Jason Voorhees, which is weird to say. He does a lot of bad stuff. He's not a good guy, but if there is one, Jason Voorhees gets all the positive points.
Well, and he's definitely getting manipulated by Freddy this whole movie, because if it weren't for Freddy, he'd still just be chilling his bones out in Camp Crystal Lake.
Killing women in hell.
Yeah, and in hell, they're already dead, folks. If they're even real at all.
Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe that's not like his hell. Maybe he's like helping Satan out by killing these people
doing him a solid, again. People that were bad,
he's tormenting.
And that's got to be vindicating for Jason to know that these people that did these things ended up in hell for it. So it's
exactly. Again, folks, Jason's the good guy by helping Satan torture the wicked.
That's folks. We've found the hottest of hot takes because it's about hell. Get it? But oh my god. But anyway, I do love this sequence of events because what leads to Jason being set on fire is somebody actually kind of reacting to what he's doing in real time for once, because that's kind of a hallmark of these movies is these people kind of just like stand there and let these things happen to them. Like, you let the slide. Like, I'm not, not victim blaming, but there's a lot of times where I'm like, you could have done a little bit more here. But they kind of just they stand there and get stabbed or chopped or whatever. But this guy like just throws alcohol on Jason and sets him on fire. Everclear. So this guy, the Everclear that was kicking his butt, Jason like kills his friend, so he just dumps the Everclear on him and then sets him on fire like immediately. Like doesn't hesitate for a second to do it
at all.
And then obviously that leads to Jason just walking around on fire, killing people instead.
And they don't know he's Jason Voorhees. They don't know he's like an unkillable thing. They think he's just like some hick that's crashing their party, and they set the man on fire. They deserve what's coming to him. Again,
well, to be fair, Jason
Voorhees is the good guy
first. Jason killed his friend first, so at that point, oh man, we're going down. This is going to be the lesson of this episode, folks. Jason's the good guy. But
I love he kills his friend though. He spins his head around completely 180. He breaks his neck in the wrong direction, and then his friend's reaction. I love his line here. He just goes, "Son of a bitch." His reaction to his friend. Then sets him on fire.
And so it was very and then like I said, this leads to Jason's kind of extended on fire killing rampage here, which is pretty gnarly, and he is eventually extinguished when he cuts a hole in a beer keg. And that puts him out. So
Yeah, why not?
The kids shouldn't be drinking. Jason is he's man of the people.
No, it is a great scene. One of the most iconic Jason scenes in the entire franchise. Like, I'll say that. I love that even his machete is on fire. He has a flaming machete as he's cutting kids down. He throws it through one of their chests. Really gnarly stuff. I really like that scene a lot. And it's practical. Like, all the fire is practical. It's really a dude set on fire. And they talked about how cumbersome it was to shoot this because he could only be on fire for like a matter of seconds. So they gotta light him on fire, get as much footage as they can, put him out, reset the scene, do the next shot. I mean, it took a long time, and it's at night, so they got like a limited time to work with. It's outdoors, not in a controlled set, so a lot of stuff went into this, but it paid off. I would say anybody that's seen this movie, if there's one scene or one image that stick in their head, you get the face off that we talked about as well, but the other one is probably Jason being on fire in the cornfield.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly.
But yeah, I mentioned, Jason Voorhees is a bit of a sympathetic character, the good guy of the film, if you will. But we've got, Freddy sort of like sends him back into his own nightmares, in his own psyche, and we go, even Laurie is in the dream with him, and it goes back to Camp Crystal Lake when he was drowned, and we kind of add to the story here, because the story was the counselors were too busy having sex, they didn't notice he was drowning, but now we're seeing that the kids are like endlessly tormenting him, and the counselors are doing nothing to stop it, and they're calling him names and pushing him into the lake. So it's a lot more tragic. I mean, it was already a very tragic story, but they even add more to it by showing that, what the kids did to him. So again, Jason is the good guy. But what's funny about that is he's obviously not, but he's chaotic neutral. I think these are D&D terms, but he doesn't care. He doesn't have an allegiance. Kelly Rowland's character towards the end of this movie is trying to distract Freddy, and she's insulting him and really getting under his skin, essentially helping Jason. But then Jason walks up from behind her and slashes her down with his machete, slams her against the tree, and kills her. So, good, bad, these words have no meaning to Jason Voorhees.
They do not. Jason is Jason. Jason does what Jason wants because Jason feels like it.
I love the scene where they're taking Jason's body. They're keeping him, the tranquilizer, they're keeping him asleep. They're taking him to Camp Crystal Lake because they think he'll be more powerful there. And in the dream with Freddy, Jason is being drowned. And they see like water coming out of his hockey mask. And they're like, what do we do? He's drowning. And our nerdy character, Charlie, is like, what do we give him, mouth to mouth? And he looks at Kia, Kelly Rowland's character, and she's like, I'm not going to do it. And Charlie's like, I can't do it. I have asthma. I don't have the lung capacity. And so the pressure goes back on Kia, and she hesitates. And Will, who's driving, just looks back and goes, Kia, he has asthma. Just dead serious. Well, obviously he can't do it. He has asthma. You've got to do this.
I mean, you're asking too many questions.
And she does, Andrew. She lifts the mask off of his gooey face with the water coming out, and it's all soggy, and she puts her mouth up to it. And Andrew, imagine the smell. Imagine what that must smell like, given Jason Voorhees' mouth to mouth.
He's going to find a way to work that into everything. The key, folks, is I have to work it in first. So I'm going to start working on that. But
good luck.
But yeah, it's an interesting. They have fun with it, and they like I said, they go to a lot of places that they really don't have to for a movie like this. But I guess it's all in attempts to kind of make this cast feel a little bit more existent than you can kind of struggle with, because a lot of movies that like this, the series itself is not bereft of installments where you don't care because the characters are all basically just ciphers or they're fodder or whatever. This movie takes the effort to make these characters feel a little bit more whole, to make them feel like they're more than just fodder. And even if most of them end up being fodder, it makes you care that much more when they ultimately do meet their demises. And I think the movie taking the effort to do that is certainly something, as we established, it didn't have to do. And I appreciate it doing that.
Andrew, we'd be remiss to not mention that WWE superstar Rey Mysterio is in this movie. He doubles Freddy Krueger for a very specific scene. But 2003, what is this, baggy pants era Rey Mysterio?
Yeah, this is just, first year or probably either right before. When this was filmed, it was probably right after he came to WWE in 2002. So baggy pants, multiple colors.
Andrew, I have not read the follow-up to this movie, which is, I believe, Freddy versus Jason versus Ash. Going back to Friday the 13th, Part 9, not only did they tease Freddy vs. Jason, but there's Evil Dead references in that movie as well. So it looks like there was potentially a movie planned after this one that introduced Ash Williams. The movie doesn't happen, but there is a comic book. Andrew, have you read that comic?
I have, once upon a time. They came out a long time ago. There's actually two. So the first one, so in the aftermath of this movie and it actually making some money, there was talk of doing a further installment of some kind, which would have added some additional horror icon to the mix. The only ones I've ever really heard that were seriously considered were Ash, who would have shown up as just Bruce Campbell as Ash Williams. And the other one I hear off and on a lot was Pinhead, that they were going to show them both kind of in hell and then have Pinhead show up, and then we would get a sequel that was kind of just the three of them in an all-out war. Whether it was going to be completely taking place in hell or not, who knows? But ultimately, none of that comes to pass. But writer Jeff Katz, who's done some comic stuff and some other things on and off over the years, did write a film treatment for what Freddy vs. Jason 2 would have looked like had Ash figured into the proceedings. So that obviously did not get run with, but the companies that held the rights to the various comics at the time were able to license that treatment and turn it into a comic that was ultimately written by James Kuhoric and drawn by Jason Craig. The first one is very much following kind of the template of Freddy versus Jason. We get our horror leads, but they're mostly surrounded by new characters. So it's a pretty straightforward version of it. Basically, the survivors of this movie are offed pretty early on in the story. They both appear briefly, only to kind of they go back to Crystal Lake to kind of put closure to the whole thing, and then Jason appears and kills them. And Freddy is now kind of trapped inside Jason's mind. That's kind of how this version goes, is he's got no body. So he just kind of lives in Jason's head. So he still appears to Jason as Pamela Voorhees. But he learns that the Necronomicon is in the shack, which I think is set up in the last Jason movie, that the Necronomicon is around. So Freddy sees it, figures that he can use it to bring himself back to power, and that's kind of the crux of that story. Ash, meanwhile, is sent to the Crystal Lake S-Mart to give his retail expertise to their current slacking employees. So that's how he ends up involved. Jason returns. Ash assumes he's a Deadite, and then obviously he gets mixed up in all of the shenanigans, and then ultimately they succeed by using the Necronomicon to kind of send everybody back. So it's pretty straightforward, but like I said, it follows a similar premise to this, where we're getting all new characters, and then we kind of get the three main guys, and they kind of trim all the fat, and it's just those three dudes doing their thing. There is a sequel that is written that is not based off a film treatment, that is just the same writer, same writers, Jeff Katz and James Kuhoric and Jason Craig, the artist, coming back, and the sequel is wild, because it brings back
more wild, more ridiculous.
More wild, because the sequel The climax of the sequel takes place at the White House in Washington, D.C., where Freddy has made attempts to kind of take over the world at this point. But a lot of returning characters come back in that one. Like Tommy Jarvis shows up, Catherine Kruger shows up. Like a lot of previous characters from the movie show up in that. So that was the one where like we used the film treatment, we told that story. So this was the story where like, okay, we're not bound by the film treatment, we're not bound by anything else. If we were going to write a sequel where we could use anybody we wanted and do anything we wanted with no sense of like a budget or what is feasible, what would we do? And that's essentially what the sequel is. It's a no holds barred. This movie would have cost tons of money to make because there's just so much going on in it. And it's big fun. I don't know if these things are still in print. They're probably not. They were published, 12, 13, 14 years ago. So I don't know if they're still out there. You probably can find them if you really want to look for them. Wasn't a huge fan of the art when I read it, but it might be time for me to go back and check it out. I don't unfortunately have them now. But yeah, so we do get the Ash versions of those stories to a degree. They are wild. And it would have been cool, but like I said, they apparently talked to Bruce Campbell about it, and he also apparently was similar to like Wes Craven's stance on Freddy versus Jason. He just didn't. He's like, why would I do that? Like, what's the point? He's like, it's like the only way that movie ends is if I win. And I was like, well, no offense, I'm pretty sure you would have won, but ultimately they just weren't able to come to terms on it. And we did get Bruce Campbell back as Ash later in Ash versus the Evil Dead, which is a great show, good fun. You should definitely check it out. But yeah, what could have been?
All right, Andrew, we did Jason, we did Freddy, we did the big crossover. We've got one more week left of spooky month here, of our slasher-themed month. And we've got to get the big guy, the OG, some would say, when it comes to masked slashers. Of course, I'm talking about Michael Myers. There's obviously lots of movies in the Halloween franchise that we could choose. There's a number of them that are poorly received. But what we landed on is the film Halloween. No, not the original from the 70s. No, not the sequel from 2018. The 2007 reboot directed by Rob Zombie. It's a movie that, as of this recording, I've only seen once, and when it was in theaters, so I'm excited to go back to it. It has its defenders, but you look at that critic score, you look at that reception, it's not hard.
Chris, can I be
I'm not
honest
sure
with you about
it's fully
something?
received.
Chris, can I
Yes.
be honest with you about something? Halloween is the only movie I ever walked out on in theaters. So
The Rob Zombie directed
the Rob Zombie Halloween
You walked out
is
of
the
theaters.
only movie I ever walked out of theaters on. So I am looking
Wow.
forward. I am looking forward to giving it its chance, giving it its fair due, and seeing
Did
where
you
I
ever
would go.
see it beginning to end?
Since then, yeah. But because I like bought the box set years ago that I
Gotcha.
then sold for a lot of money. But yeah, I have not gone back to this in some time though. Like you said though, it does have its defenders. It does have people that are that think, especially his sequel. I see a lot of people talk about, but we're gonna be looking at the reboot itself, so I'm excited.
Come back next week for that, but for now, it's of course time for our question of the week. This week, the question comes from Dr. Douglas. They're in our Discord, and here's what they ask. What films do you believe benefit the most from a director's cut? And are there any instances where you prefer the theatrical cut? That is a great question. Now, if I could get a little nerdy and pedantic, the term director's cut gets thrown around a lot for movies that aren't actually director's cuts. In a sense, every single movie that's made has a director's cut. Directors always have a last say on their own personal cut of the movie, but that's usually not what is released in theaters, but they do get like that personal copy of the movie. There are times when that director's cut gets to see the light of day. There's some notable examples I'm sure you and I are both going to talk about. But in most cases, whenever you see a movie, you'll look at the wording. It's usually not director's cut. It's usually unrated cut, or the version we couldn't show you in theaters, or the Deadpool 2 is like the super long cut or something like that. They've got these other names for it. You have times where like the director was definitely not involved, like Alien 3. David Fincher wants nothing to do with that movie, so that is called the assembly cut, the extended version of that.
Producer's
Spider-Man
cut,
3 has a producer's cut. Yeah, you know what I'm saying here. Now, for the sake of this question, we're going to count all of those. Those are all fair play for a movie that benefits from a director's cut. We'll just say in general, extended cut. Was it necessary for me to go on this tangent? Probably not, but I wanted to flex my film knowledge, and I hope it was worth it.
Folks, you're not here for straightforward. You're here for the journeys. You're here for the side quests. You're here to hear us wax philosophical about the things that we know. And that's what Chris just did. Take it or leave it. Take it, please. Don't leave. For the love of God, don't leave.
Let's answer this question, Andrew. What movie benefits from a director's cut? What comes to mind? What jumps in your mind first?
The first thing jumps in my mind straight up, unequivocally, is Kingdom of Heaven. Because the thing about some of the more iconic director's cuts, for me at least, is I don't know if it's like improving the film. Like when I think of like a most impactful director's cut, I'm thinking of something that takes a movie from being middling or even bad and takes it to good. And that is pretty rare in the grand scheme of things. There are things like Aliens has a director's cut, but Aliens, the original version, is still pretty great. Like The Exorcist has a director's cut that adds in the spider crawl, which is like the super iconic sequence that's not even in the original movie. That's the funniest thing to me about that. But like a lot of these are things where like you're looking at a movie that was already good to great, and a director's cut either enhances it or just kind of keeps it in the same spot. Kingdom of Heaven, Ridley Scott's a kind of Crusades-esque movie. The theatrical version is not. #PP. It's not very good, as far as I'm concerned. His director's cut adds 45 minutes, completely changes a whole lot, adds a lot to the emotional journey of the characters, and genuinely makes it into a good movie. And for me, that's still kind of the standard as far as director's cuts go, because it actually takes something from being subpar to making it good. That's not to say there aren't other director's cuts that I enjoy. There are, but that's one of the biggest to me that stands out as actually showing that the director's vision was something wholly different than what we got.
That's a good pull, Andrew, because up until a couple minutes ago, I forgot that movie existed. I remember it coming and going and not hearing great things, but I have heard about that director's cut. And people are like, oh no, you really got to give it a second chance. You got to watch the director's cut. And it coming from your mouth sounds like you agree with those people. So I haven't seen either version of the movie, but would you say watch the theatrical first at all, or just go straight to the director's cut?
No, I would go straight to the director's cut.
Good pull, Andrew. The first movie to jump into my mind is gonna be Watchmen. I much prefer the director's cut or the ultimate cut. The ultimate cut has the comic and everything, the animated sequence. That's usually how I watch the movie, but even the director's cut adds some really good stuff to that movie. My favorite scene of the movie, which is the final scene with the original Night Owl. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It's only in the director's cut, and it might be my favorite scene of the movie. So it really fleshes that movie out. I think it's a significant improvement. Obviously, Zack Snyder, no stranger to director's cuts. A lot of his movies get them, and Justice League probably being one of the most famous director's cuts of all time because of what went into that release. But Watchmen pops in my head first. Followed closely by Blade Runner, though.
Yeah,
Blade Runner's an
Blade
interesting
Runner's
one.
Another one.
I mean, there's like 7
versions of Blade Runner now.
7. I'm no Blade Runner expert. I've seen the original theatrical and I've seen the final cut, and I would recommend final cut. I assume, Andrew, that's the preferred version these days. Also,
that's Ridley Scott's preferred version as well. Ridley Scott and director's cuts, like he seems to run into that problem a lot, where his movies get shifted up and he has to come back and fix it later. But no, Blade Runner is good. It presents it very much as it was intended. It removes a lot of the voiceovers and stuff like that you just don't really need. And And yeah, it's Blade Runner would be another one where I don't mind the theatrical of Blade Runner, but I think the final cut is a significant step up.
Now, here's one. He asked, are there any instances where you prefer the theatrical? One that kind of toes the line for me is Terminator 2. Now, again, to kind of go back to our definition of director's cut, James Cameron says the theatrical version, that is his director's cut. That's his preferred. But there is an extended version that he did supervise that he says is more just there, like, if you love this movie, you want to see some extra scenes, you can check that one out. But he prefers the leaner theatrical. And in a way, I kind of agree with him. The theatrical is the one I fell in love with, and it's a perfect movie, in my opinion. It's one of the best sequels of all time, one of the best action movies of all time. But being that I'm such a big fan of the franchise and that movie, and I've seen it a million times, I also like that extended version, specifically the very cool scene where Linda Hamilton is like doing brain surgery on the Terminator, and they have like her twin sister as her mirror image. The way they set up the shot is very cool, but it even like explains some how would I say, it's a plot hole of the original, but it explains how this particular Terminator is able to learn and evolve over the course of the movie, because she takes out like a specific chip from his head. But anyway, it slows the pace down a little bit, which one of the reasons the theatrical cut is so good is because the breakneck pace that it moves at. But I kind of go back and forth over which one I prefer, but that might be an instance where I prefer the theatrical.
This one's a bit of a strange cut, but I first off, I agree with you. I think that a lot of James Cameron's director's cuts end up being very strange because James Cameron is such a meticulous director. He's one of those people that kind of has final cut on his film. And so when you get a director's cut of a James Cameron film, it's always kind of strange because he ends up saying things like that, though, where he's like, yeah, it's fine, but it's like, if you want more of it, check this out. That's kind of how it is, especially Aliens too. But one that's interesting to me, and I actually like the extended version of it, is a movie called That Thing You Do. Not sure if you're familiar with this one, Chris.
Just because you talk about it, Andrew, you talk about this movie all the time. This is the movie I've never seen. I remember it coming out. I remember the trailers. I spent a good 8 years of my life never thinking about it. And then every day that I talk to you, Andrew, you find a way to bring up that.
I absolutely don't, Chris. That's ridiculous.
Sometimes multiple times a day.
That is not true. Don't put that on me. Anyway, the movie as it is in theaters, I mean, it's a very straightforward story. Garage band accidentally stumbles across a hit song that skyrockets them to fame, and they almost immediately shatter. But theatrical version is a kind of a brisk 90 minutes. Very straightforward. First act is them getting discovered. Second act is the rise. Third act is the peak. They did an extended cut of that movie that adds 40 minutes to the runtime, which is insane for like a lighthearted comedy about a one-hit wonder musical group.
Yeah.
And I like it, but it drags. It's super long, and it's just something where it's like, I really want to. It's very much like T2's cut, where it's like, if you love this movie and you want to live in that world a little bit longer and know these characters a little bit better, it's good. But as far as narratively, it slows to a crawl at sometimes. And there's a lot that are kind of like that. Like, I like That Thing You Do cut, but the original cut, and I like the extended cut, but the original cut is just a much leaner movie. It gets to the point. And there are a lot of directors. Like, there's a director's cut of Heat. Why?
Well,
Why is there a director's cut of Heat?
I agree with that.
It's an amazing movie.
But the way you're describing That Thing You Do reminds me so much of Almost Famous and the bootleg cut. Like, it's already a pretty long movie. The music's good. Like, I like that original a lot. But like that extended cut, like, I've seen the original a lot, so it's cool to check out the extended cut and see some new scenes. But like, it really kills the pace of the movie.
It stretches. It really stretches whether you want to live in that world longer or not.
Yeah.
Like, I love
Almost Famous.
I really want to be here
this
long. Yeah, and there's a lot where like I could say that like I prefer the theatrical, because like I said, there's so many extended cuts. There's so many, versions. But yeah, That Thing You Do is kind of my go-to for stuff where I'm like, I think it's a little bit too much of a good thing. Where like, you like that world, you like these characters, but you're going so deep and things that just kind of kill the pace as well. And that doesn't mean I don't watch it. Another example I can think of is Mallrats. There is an extended cut of Mallrats. Now, because there was a whole subplot that, there was whole subplots that got cut from that movie that ended up getting it to its theatrical version that's pretty lean. But years ago, I think it was for the 10th anniversary DVD or something, they finally found that original cut and remastered it and put it together. And there's a completely different opening sequence. There's so much different in it that it's not really, I say so much different, but the entire setup of the movie is different. The opening sequence is just a completely different setting, a completely different sequence. But it literally is like a 2-hour and 10-minute movie about kids hanging out in a mall at the end of the day. And there's just no reason for it to be that long. Ultimately for a story that ultimately unfolds the same way. And so it's another instance where it's cool, if you like the way Kevin Smith writes his characters and you like these characters, it's easy enough to just kind of want to live in that longer version of the movie. But the theatrical just gets to the point so much faster, and the plot just moves so much at a much better pace. There are a lot of cuts like that. When you see extended cut, it very much is just key for we're going to extend some things, we're going to add some stuff. And I say this #PP 90% of the time when I watch deleted scenes, I know why they were deleted. I agree
100%.
I'm saying that as nicely as I can. And they know that. It's why it's deleted. There are times, and you will see a sequence where it's man, that was a really cool sequence or a really cool scene, and it sucks that they cut it. But then you think about the logistics of putting it back into the movie, and you're like, oh yeah, it's a cool scene, but where it was in the movie would have killed the pace. It would have just dragged the movie to a crawl and things like that. And so yeah, I would say for every one sequence that's wow, that was really good and the movie would have benefited from having it, there's easily 9 or 10 where I'm no, I completely understand why that was cut.
Andrew, I did a quick Google of director's cut movies, most famous director's cuts. I'm scrolling through the list here. Just want to shout out a few that we would be. I don't want to get out of here with us missing some of these. Planet Terror and Death Proof. That's a little sure. When you separate them, they added a little bit of time, and I get that. But there's one on here that I'm surprised that you haven't mentioned. Superman 2, a pretty famous director's cut that I know you're a big fan of. Yeah.
I'm a fan of it, but I don't really like that the ending is the same from Superman. I've always struggled with that. The ending of Superman 2, the Donner cut, he does the spin the earth back trick again. And that... Why? Why you do that again?
Realistically, Andrew, why doesn't... if Superman has that power, why doesn't he always do that?
Yeah, but... No, it's something where that was one, and the problem too with Superman 2, the Donner cut, is that just all the footage wasn't there. So there's test footage that's used in place of sequences. There's other things that are used. So it just doesn't. It's cool that it exists, and I'm very glad Donner got to do it. But it's something where it really only exists for aficionados because it's unfinished in a way.
So would you say you prefer theatrical?
Yeah, probably. It's Superman 2 is a big step down from Superman the movie for me, kind of no matter which way you slice it. But yeah, I think the theatrical is at least more complete. Like I said, it's a cool thing that it exists, but it's definitely a situation where the whole movie just isn't there. And they did their best, and they make a fairly cohesive experience out of it. And there's some new CGI sequences that are used and stuff like that. But the fact that he spins the world back again at the end, I was just come on. Don't just go back there again, Jesus. But and you could do Apocalypse Now, the final cut. Is that? But Apocalypse Now is pretty good. And the final cut is a mild step up, and there's a bunch like that. Troy is another one I hear thrown out a lot. That the Wolfgang Peterson director's cut of Troy is a much more epic, cohesive experience. Any others on your list that you want to call out?
That was the main one. Close Encounters of the Third Kind was on there. I haven't seen either version, so I can't speak to it. But Kingdom of Heaven, you'll be happy to hear, was
Godfather 3.
That's
another one that just got a new cut recently.
Oh, yeah.
There's been a couple
changed
of changed ones.
The entire presentation of that movie by calling it Coda. So
it's the Godfather Coda.
is that 1 and 2 was the Godfather series, and this is like the epilogue, right? It's kind of reframing how you should view that movie by not calling it part 3. Pretty interesting.
And it is. And the general consensus is that, yes, there are some base level things that you can't really get over. But ultimately, it creates a far more accurate presentation of what they were going for. Coppola, like I said, he's done that with a couple. There's been the Cotton Club just got like an encore edition where that was a new kind of reassembly of that. There's a couple that he's gone back on and tried to be kind of try to reframe a little bit. And Coppola is just such an interesting director because he does things. He's got a very specific vision that he's had, and there's a really good video by Patrick Willems on just Coppola's career and kind of how he's chosen to go about things, and it's very auspicious stuff. And so I really respect the fact that he can kind of go back and do this. Director's cuts are always such a weird thing. Like you get people like George Lucas that like reframe the movies, and then they want that to be the new version. Like that's the new version. Like the version, the special edition of Star Wars is what George Lucas wants you to watch, for better or worse. Ridley Scott is somebody who kind of like recuts his movies finally, but then just leaves all the versions out there. Just like, you know what? I recut Blade Runner, but you know what? The original version's still out there if you want to watch it. And then the joke I always make is that Michael Mann re-edits his movies and then just doesn't tell anybody. He just just keeps injecting new versions of his movies out there. Like they literally like Heat, the definitive director's edition. It was like, what'd you do this for? Like Heat's like amazing. Nobody asked you to do this. Like Black Hat, a movie he released years ago, he recut, and the only place it's ever aired was like once on FX. Like he's never circulated his re-edit of Black Hat. Ali, another one he did, they released a new version on Blu-ray, and people didn't realize it was a new cut like until they watched it. They were like, wait a second, this isn't the version of the movie I've seen before. So it's such a weird thing that happens with some directors, the way they approach director's cuts. But yeah, Coppola has, just like I said, he's been hitting up a couple of his old ones to kind of, I think, see if he can kind of reframe those and get them closer to what he was intending. Great question, Doug. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And as always, we want to hear from you. What is your preferred director's cut? Which one do you like to stick with, the theatrical? Let us know. Hop into that Discord. There's a link in our show notes. Hit us up on social media. Look, whatever is convenient for you. And as always, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for a SoundCloud link. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. Hey, that's Kelly Rowland of Destiny's Child, who I'm reading broke up amicably shortly before the release of this movie. Oh boy, shortly before the release.
Jesus, dude.
Shortly before the release of this movie. Of course, I'm talking about Michael Myers. And which movie are we going to be covering? There's a few poorly received Halloween
Gold
movies
member,
to
folks.
choose
It's
from.
gonna be Gold member.
Gold member? What?
Because Mike Myers, it's
the actor.
Chris, cut that joke. It did not land. It's terrible. I hate it. Get me out.